All right, Chevret, with Hashem's help, we're learning today Yevamos Daf Lamed Aleph. We left off yesterday Daf Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the top. And let's make a quick recap. Halacha number 1. Whenever a erva falls to Yibum, no Yibum nor Chalitza is needed nor allowed. Step number 2. If the erva has a co-wife, the first Mishnah, which is the opinion of Beis Hillel, which is how we rule, how we paskin, that the tzaras erva is also exempt from both Yibum and Chalitza. Based on these two rules, the Mishnah Daf Lamed Amud Beis spoke out the following scenario. Scenario number 1. When you have, there's Reuven and Shimon. Shimon is married first to a woman that's not an erva to Reuven. Right? So let's say today the example that Reuven has a daughter. Shimon is married to Miriam, which is not related to Reuven. And then Shimon made a Safek Kedushin to Reuven's daughter. If the Kedushin would be Chal, if the Kedushin would be a Kedushin, now that Shimon is married to an erva of Reuven, if Shimon were to die now, his original wife is a tzaras erva, and she should be free to marry anyone she wants. But if the Kedushin was not Chal, if the Kedushin with the erva didn't work, so then Shimon's wife continues to be just Shimon's wife, upon which there's a mitzvah, if Shimon dies without children, for Reuven to do Yibum to her. There's a doubt. What did the Mishnah rule in such a scenario? So the Mishnah says what we learned many times until now. Whenever there's a doubt, Yibum cannot be done. But on the other hand, to allow the woman to marry Lashuk without anything is also a mistake. So therefore, chayletzes v'lo misyabemes. Likewise, the Mishnah gave a case, starting with the word Safek Gerushin. This case would be when Shimon is married to a woman that's not related to Reuven. Shimon is married bevadai to a woman that's a erva to Reuven. Shimon also married Reuven's daughter, for sure. But before Shimon dies, Shimon gives that erva a divorce document, and the Mishnah said, Safek get, if it was a doubt if the get worked or not. So here also, we should have the same logic, that now if Shimon dies, our Mishnah is of the opinion that Misa Mapelis, that Yibum goes into effect by death. When Shimon died, there was a doubt whether Miriam, the unrelated woman to Reuven, is a tzaras erva or not. So the Mishnah says here also, chiletzes v'loi misyabemes. The challenge we had is that...
Just clarify the difference between if it went into effect by death.
Oh, absolutely. Because we also learned in the beginning, we learned in Daf Yud Gimel, we learned again 2 days ago, that there is an opinion that holds, that there are Tanoim that hold, that it's not Misa that's Matpelis, it's Nisuyim Horishonim Mapilim, which means that if at any time of Shimon's marriage, he's married to a woman that's not related to his brother, and also related to an erva of his brother, if that happened during the marriage, then they'll both be exempt from Yibum and Chalitza, regardless if the get worked or not. Because even if there was a get before Misa, or even if she died. Correct. Okay, so therefore, obviously, our Mishnah will go only by the opinion of Misa Mapelis. Here's the challenge. When the Mishnah gave an example of a Safek Kedushin, the Mishnah gave an example of a Safek Kedushin. A man threw Kedushin to a woman. They're both in public domain. They were exactly 8 amos apart from each other. The Kedushin fell in between. There is a doubt whether it fell closer to him, which means he did not do Kedushin, whether it fell the millimeter closer to her, which means she received the Kedushin. That was the case the Mishnah gave. When it came to the Mishnah giving examples of Safek Gerushin, instead of the Mishnah giving exactly the same case, which would have worked, a man and a woman are married, he threw a get to her, they were 8 amos apart and it landed in between them, and we have a doubt, Safek Karav Loi, Safek Karav Law. That's a Safek Gerushin. No. Here the Mishnah gave 3 examples of a man giving a get to his wife, the get midoiraisa is 100% kosher. Midrabanan, the get is not kosher. There's such a concept we also learned previously, that if something is good midoiraisa, but it's not good midrabanan, so you have to take both into account, and therefore, choletzes v'lo misyabemes. Rabba made a diuk. Rabba said, reason why the Mishnah did not give a case of Safek Gerushin by get, because if that were to happen, even Chalitza would not be needed. That's what Rabba said. Why? Because being that before the get was given, what was this co-wife's Hazaka? Being that she was married, she was a co-wife of an erva, before the get was given. And therefore, the wording is that Cheskas Heter L'Shuk, she can marry, if Shimon were to die right now, being that she's a co-wife to an erva, she can marry anyone out there. Chalitza is not needed. So that Chazaka, so to say, resolves the Safek, and we don't take the Safek into account. So if there's a doubt if there was a get or not, you don't know. So allow the original Chazaka to continue. Which is why she would not even need Chalitza. Came along the Gemara, and the Gemara challenged the Rabbah, but why don't we use the same Chazaka by Safek Kiddushin? What would be the Chazaka over there? The Chazaka is that when Shimon was originally married to a woman that's not related to the Reuven, she was Cheskas Heter Liyavam. Then the scenario would have been that if Shimon would have died, she would have been allowed to do Yibum with Reuven. It would have been a mitzvah for her to do Yibum with Reuven. Now that you have a Safek Kiddushin with an erva, you have a doubt. So why don't we allow the original Chazaka to go into place and allow her to do Kiddushin with Reuven? To which Rabbah responds, yes. Really, she should be allowed. Because the Chazaka should overrule the Safek. The Chachamim were Machmer. They said, you know what? Since maybe the Kiddushin was a Kiddushin, and if the Kiddushin was a Kiddushin, she now is a Tzaras Erva, so therefore do Chalitz. To which the Gemara counters, you can only do a Chumrah if it's not going to bring you to a Kula. You can only be stringent if the stringency is only a stringency. But if the stringency will bring you to a leniency, then you should not do a stringency. And Rabbah therefore said the following. By Kiddushin, the reason why the Mishnah says if there's a Safek Kiddushin, still you cannot do Yibum, Chiletzes, V'loi Misyabemes, when really Yibum is allowed. Machmer du Chalitza. What's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is when people are going to say, if Chalitza is needed, that means there's a bond. If there's a bond, let us do Yibum. So what's the worst thing that would happen by Kiddushin? Reuven would do Yibum. So what? Being that she was Becheskas Heter Liyavam, and really that Chazaka overrides the Safek, there's no downside. It means even if they're going to go ahead and say on their own, wrongfully, if Chayletzes, it means I can do Yibum, let them do Yibum. If she will do Yibum, she's not violating anything, because really the Chazaka overrules the Safek. Masha'enkin, in the case of Safek Gerushin, what's the case of Safek Gerushin? That what is her Chazaka? Cheskas Heter L'Shuk. Because really she for sure is a co-wife to an erva. If the get work, then she's no longer a Tzaras Erva. But what does the Chazaka say? That she remains a Cheskas Erva, Tzaras Erva, which means she's not allowed to do Yibum. If the Chachamim would be Machmer, and they would say, really, she can marry out without anything. But let's just to be sure, do Chalitza. The moment people do Chalitza, there's a fear that people might think, if I have to do Chalitza, it means I'm connected. I don't want to do Chalitza, I want to do Yibum. There, if Reuven will do Yibum with her, he's violating the Chazaka. The Chazaka was that she's Mutter L'Shuk. The Chazaka is that she's a Tzaras Erva. So there's a downside by this Chumrah. So Rabbah therefore says that the Mishnah did not give an example of Safek Gittin, the way it gave an example by Safek Kiddushin, because the Chachamim would not be Machmer there. Be'emes, she's mutter to marry out without anything. It's about her Chazaka. It's about her Chazaka. Cheskas Heter L'Shuk resolves the Safek. I be Machmer and say do Chalitza anyway. That Chumrah might lead to a terrible thing happening. Of Reuven saying, why would I do Chalitza? I like her. I want to do Yibum. Or I want to do the mitzvah. I want to do Yibum. So a Chumrah that can come to a Kula is a Chumrah that the Chachamim do not impose. By Safek Gerushin, she doesn't even need Chalitza. So therefore the Mishnah gave the examples of Safek Gerushin where there was a get midoiraisa. And it's only not a get midrabanan. Chayletzes v'lo misyabemes.
So all reasons why, if he had done the Safek Gerushin and it's a Raisa Safek.
Correct.
In that case, we would not say do Chalitza.
Exactly. Okay. That's where we're up to. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Eloheinu shehakolim v'dvarim. The Gemara is going to challenge Rabba until the end. And let me tell you already the end. Abaya disagrees with Rabba's interpretation. Abaya holds that just like by Safek Kiddushin, Chayletzes v'lo misyabemes, by a real Safek Gerushin, Chayletzes v'lo misyabemes, the Mishnah gave different examples by Kiddushin and different examples by Gerushin. By Kiddushin, the example was a doubt. By Gerushin, it was a Gerushin that's good mid'oraisa but bad mid'rabanan. One should teach the other. That means that both by Kiddushin and by Gerushin, Safek Karavloi, Safek Karavlo, Safek Chayletzes v'lo misyabemes. Both by Kiddushin and by Gerushin, that if the act was an act that's good mid'oraisa, but it was disqualified mid'rabanan, Chayletzes v'lo misyabemes. Same thing. The Mishnah gives some type of example by Kiddushin, another type of example by Gerushin. Each one should teach the other. Okay, but let's read how Abaya slugs up Rabba. 6 lines from the top. Eis ve'Abaya. Abaya challenges Rabba. It says later in Masechta Yevamos and Daf Samach Zayin. Look at this case. Nafal habayis olav al bas achiv. Okay, ve'eino yudua eize mehem mes rishayna. Reuven and Shimon. Okay, Reuven, whether he's single or married is not relevant here. Shimon is married to Reuven's daughter, to an erva, and Shimon is married to Miriam. Shimon and Reuven's daughter were in a building, and the building collapsed on them, a mapoilus, and they both died. Now, we don't know who died first. Big difference. Again, this Mishnah also holds Misa Mapelas. If Shimon died first, which means when Shimon died, he had 2 living wives. One of them was an erva to Reuven. The other one was the co-wife of the erva, which means they are both exempt from Yibum and Chalitza. Chalitza is not needed and not allowed, and Yibum is not allowed. But if first the niece died, if first Reuven's daughter died, which means when Reuven's daughter died, Shimon was still alive and married to one wife. That one wife that's living is not an erva to Reuven. Then Shimon died. That woman should be allowed in Yibum, and she should need Chalitza. So what do you do? Says the Mishnah, Tzarasa Chayletzes v'lo misyabemes. There's a doubt. So whenever you have a doubt, that's what we're saying. Don't do Yibum, but you need Chalitza. Asks Abaya to Rabba, you have a Hazaka Cheskas Heter L'Shuk, exactly the same case. When Shimon is living with his Erev, with Reuven's daughter and his other wife, what's the din now? That if Shimon were to die right now, the daughter is an Erva, the co-wife is a co-wife of an Erva, they're both Muter L'Shuk. That's a Hazaka. You have a Safek who died first. Why shouldn't Cheskas Heter L'Shuk resolve the doubt? And why is Chalitza needed? Amai Hachinami Neima tells Abaya to Rab, according to your logic, that this Chazaka resolves, clarifies the doubt. Ishazu becheskas heter l'shuk emedis umisafek atabalo Isra al tasrena misafek. And the Chiteiman tells Abaya to Rab, if you're going to say Hachinami Midoi Raisa, she can marry without Chalitza. Why did the Mishnah later say that she needs Chalitza l'chumra? But again, Chumra the Asila de Kolohu. What's the Chumra? How will this Chumra bring to a leniency? What's the downside of the Chumra? The moment Reuven is told, you need to do Chalitza to Miriam, to the co-wife, to the second wife of Shimon, who's not related to him, Reuven might interpret it by saying, 1 second, if I need to do Chalitza, that means there's a zika. I want to do Yibum. And he might end up doing Yibum. She'imato emer cheletzes misyabemes gavaldik mamash akashan Rabba. Answers Rabba like this. No, I'm standing my ground. The cheskas heter l'shuk resolves, is mevarer the doubt. And therefore, even though we don't know what happened, Halach is going to say that the co-wife is muteres l'shuk. Why did the Mishnah say cheletzes? It's a chumrah. And let me tell you why this chumrah will not come to a kula. 2 answers. Answer number 1, Gerishin de shchichi gazru barabanan, mapoilas de loy shchichi loy gazru barabanan. When do we say that the rabbis, because of a fear that someone will say that if chalitza is needed, that means there's a connection, you know what, I'm going to do yibum, that's something very rare. I mean, there are so many cases that we learned before. chayletzes v'loy misyabemes. Not every chalitza means that you had both options. Elamai, it could happen. The whole case of mapilis is an unusual case. It's not such a common case. It's a lot more common for a man to divorce his wife than for a man and one of his wives to be in a building where the building collapses and they both die and you don't know who died first. That's such a rare case, so there it makes sense that the Chachamim should not be afraid of the chumrah that might come to a kula. And we have this regularly, that the rabbis did not add chumras, they did not enact rabbinic enactments in scenarios in which the scenario itself is very uncommon. They would enact the chumrah of chayletzes, but to worry that this chumrah will bring to a kula, that's an additional worry. And therefore, take off the chumrah, that they won't do. Hold on, I know what you think, but let's go weiter. Number 2, inami. I'll tell you even more than that. Gerushin, there's a big difference between mapoilus and gerushin. In the case of gerushin, where a man gave a safek get, that's the case of Rabbi, he threw the get, safek cut of loy, safek cut of law, and then Shimon dies, both wives are living. When people look at the scenario, they see both of them there. When the Chachamim, if the Chachamim would say Chalitza is needed, they would wonder, how did the Chachamim allow Chalitza? Why is Chalitza needed if both the Erevas here? It's going to make people think that for sure the Chachamim know that the get worked, because they see the problem in front of them. By the case of the Mapelas, both of them died. The only one that's living is the co-wife, And people, no one knows, no one is expecting the Chachamim to be prophets in the Lashon of the Rishonim to know who died first. People know what happened. They were in a building, the building collapsed, we don't know what happened. No, it's there, everyone knows that we don't know what happened. Everyone there knows by my Mapelas that it's a doubt. And being that Chalitza is only because of a doubt, and maybe she's a tzaras erva, no one is going to do yibum. In the case of a get, when both women are there, people will figure, why did the Chachamim say to do chalitza? Because she was not a co-wife. Because when the problem is there, it makes people think that the problem was better resolved. Let's read it inside. Gerushin the kaime erva, the erva is living, the kamoichach, she's shouting, I'm an erva, and the co-wife of the erva should be exempt. And if the Chachamim are going to say chayletzes, people are going to say, you know why they said chayletzes? Because they know the get was good. And even though the Ereva is living, the Chachamim would say, you need to have chalitza, only people will say, the kamu beirabanan begita, the gita ma'aliyu. It must have been that the Chachamim know that it's a good get. And if it's a good get, then yibum should be permitted also. Vasili yibume. That is the chumrah that can bring you to a kula. That's why they didn't enact that chumrah. But in the case of a tzaras mapoiles, the Ereva is not living. People know that they died. Everyone knows that when a house collapses, you don't know who died first. So they know, everyone has a clarity that whatever the sages said, they only said based on a doubt. So therefore, no one was going to do yibum. Is mikamu rabbanim b'mapoiles? No one is going to think that they know, that they're neviim to know who died first. In other words, bottom line, Rabbah responds, Mapoilis is different, Gittin is different. Yes, there is a Hazaka, Cheskas Heter L'Shuk. That Hazaka by Gittin overrides the doubt. Mapoilis is different. Says the Gemara, says Abaye to Rabbah, okay, let me find you another Mishnah that speaks about Gittin also, not about Mapoilis. And there we see clearly that when there's a Safek get, Chalitza is needed, and they were not afraid that Chalitza is going to come to Yibum. Mamish. In fact, the Gemara Vegabi Gerushin Miloi Tanan says in the Mishnah. It says in Masechtas Gittin, Choyisoi Meres B'Rishus Harabim. Mama's this case. A woman is standing in the public domain, and the husband is 8 amas away from her, and he's throwing her a get. Okay, Shimon is throwing a get to one of his wives. He's throwing the get to Reuven's daughter. All right, to his niece, which is his wife, to the erva, and he throws the get. Karev law, if the get lands closer to her in her 4 cubits, then she's divorced. Which means now that Shimon's other wife is no longer the co-wife of an erva. Shimon's other wife now would be obligated yibum or chalitz. Omedes karev loy, but if the get falls closer to him, then eina megareshes. Then the Mishnah there says machzal. What happens if it falls in the middle? No, we don't know. So what's the answer? Migoreshes, the eina megareshes. These are the words of the Mishnah. She is divorced and she's not divorced. And then we asked in Masechta Gittin, Lamai Hilchasa, what is the consequence of she is divorced but she's not divorced? And there we gave two responses. That the Kohen that if the husband, Shimon, is a Kohen, Shimon can no longer be with this woman who he gave a get to. Even if he's going to say, I'll give you another Kedushin, it means even if the get went into effect, I'm remarrying you. A Kohen cannot remarry a divorcee, even if this woman is his divorcee. She's a Megoreshes. And another Nafkemina Lehilchasa that was spoken there in Masechtas Gittin, that V'i Ervahi, that if she's an Erva, the woman who's Safek Megoreshes, and after the Safek Megoreshes happened, the husband dies, Tzarasa Baya Chalitza. Clearly, the Tzara needs Chalitza. And V'lo Yomrinan, and in Masechtas Gittin, we're not saying the way you, Rabbah, are proposing to say in our Mishnah here, She'im ato emir chayletzes, that Chachamim would not say chayletzes, because if they'll say chayletzes, then maybe you miss Yevamos. It's a chumrah do asi l'dei kula. We don't say that in the case of Safek Gerushin. Why didn't you? So your answer to the Mishnah is not valid. When you say that our Mishnah, Safek cut of loy by get, Safek cut of law, chalitza is not needed. In Masechta Gittin, it doesn't say the words chalitza is needed. It says migoreshes ve'eni migoreshes, but lamai hilchasa chayletzes v'lei misyabemos. Answers the Gemara, answers Rabbah, you forgot something. Let's go into this doubt. When you say we have a doubt whether it was closer to him or closer to her, until now, we are thinking that the only observers are the man and the wife, or the man and the ex-wife, and they're both saying we don't know what happened. Not emes, not here and not there. In both cases, the doubt is because there are claims being made by independent people. The Mishnah Masechta Gittin is speaking about a scenario where two witnesses said it was closer to him, two other witnesses says it's closer to her. It's called Trei Lagabe Trei. It's 2 against 2. Here, in Masechta Yevamos, it's speaking about 1 against 1. 1 and 1 is nothing. What difference will there be? Let's read it inside. But we learned over there that Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, both the Amri Tarvayu, that Hacha over there, here means over there in Gittin, Bishtei Kitei Edem Askinon, we have 2 groups of witnesses. Achas Oimeres, one group said it was closer to her. She's divorced. She's divorced. The co-wife is not a co-wife of an erva. She's divorced. The co-wife should do yibum. Achas, and another group of witnesses, 2 witnesses say the get fell closer to the husband, which means there is no get, which means, like the Hazaka, that she continues to be tzaras erva. The Havel is fake the oiraisa, therefore you have a suffix midoiraisa. And let's speak it out by heart. The way Rabbi Akiva Eger explains that the Gemara here, unlike in a few lines, holds that whenever you have 2 groups of witnesses and you have a suffix de'oraisa, what happened? The Hazaka cannot resolve the suffix. Why not? Whenever there's 2 and 2, the Hazaka loses all its power. And he says like this: what is the din when there are 2 witnesses saying 1 and you have 100 witnesses saying the opposite? So we have a rule that we don't say, since it's 100 against 2, we believe the 100. We don't say that. There's a concept that in Torah, the highest level of proof, the highest level of birur are 2 witnesses. And the moment you have 2 or 3 or 4, it's the highest. 2 is already the highest. So the words of the Chachamim are Trei Kemeya. 2 is like 100. So if you have 2 witnesses saying, for example, Karav Lo, and you have 100 witnesses saying Karav Loi, because the Chazaka, what is the Hazaka saying? That it was cut of law or cut of loy? The Hazaka is saying that it's cut of loy. The Hazaka is that she's, in other words, she's a co-wife to an erva. She continues to be a co-wife to an erva. In other words, the get taka fell, but it fell closer to him. So just like if he were to have 100 people saying it fell closer to him, and there would be only 2 people saying it fell closer to her, what would be the bin? It would still be an equal doubt. It would remain a suffix. His 100 witnesses would not overpower her 2 witnesses. So Hazaka, the way we understand now, is also a means of birur. It's like a rule. Since there is a Hazaka, that clarifies, that proves that it fell closer to him. Okay, put the Hazaka together with the 2 witnesses, that's Karav Loi. Put them together. What do you have? Proof, karav loy. But there are two witnesses that are saying it was karav law. So it's 2 against 2. The havamina here, the logic here is that Hazaka works like a clarification, like a birur. Witnesses work like a birur. The Torah says that 2 witnesses is the highest level of birur, which is why if 2 witnesses say A and 1,000 witnesses say the opposite, they're considered equal, and the suffix remains. So being that there's a suffix de'oraisa, why is it a suffix de'oraisa? Because each side has 2 witnesses, the Hazaka has no power. Which is why the Mishnah says, choyletzes v'loy misyabemes. In our case over here, the Mishnah must be according to Rabbah that there wasn't 2 against 2, it was 1 against 1, or no one against no one. In other words, there's no halachic proof to either side. So whenever you have no clarification, whenever there is no real suffix d'oraisa, so now the Hazaka says the way things are, leave things the way they are be. Just like before she was a co-wife to an erva, the halacha will pass and she remains a co-wife to an erva, which is why she doesn't need chalitza. And like we asked, be machmer, that's a chumrah that's going to come to a kula.
So why over there does she need chalitza?
Because over there was 2 against 2. And when it's 2 against 2, there's a suffix. And the moment there's a real suffix d'oraisa, chazaka does not work. We just be explained. Okay. So now the Gemara, but over here, Masechtas Yevamos, bekat achas, there was only 2 people altogether. That means each side only has 1 witness. 1 witness, by davar shebe'erva, ein davar shebe'erva pachos mi shnayim. 1 witness doesn't mean anything. The havalei sveka derabanan, and by a sveka derabanan, the chazaka does resolve the suffix, which is why she does not even need chalitza. Now, the answer of Rabbah is based on the premise that in our Mishnah it's only 1 against 1. Who told you that? How do you know that? Ask the Gemara. So Rabbah answers, I'll tell you why. Because since in the case of Kedushin, the Mishnah must be speaking about a case where it was 1 against 1, as we'll say in a moment. And the Mishnah put together Gittin and Kedushin. So Dumi the Kedushin. Just like in the case of Kedushin, the Katachas, Av Gerushin the Katachas. And the Kedushin Gufayu, how do you know that in the case? In our Mishnah, by Kedushin, there was only 1 against 1. Maybe it was 2 against 2. Dilma bebeis kitei edim. Answers the Gemara, listen here, my friend. I bebeis kitei edim. If there would be 2 groups of witnesses, think about this. 2 saying that the Kedushin was karav loy. He did not marry her. If he did not marry her, what does she remain? She remains a wife that needs to do yibum. And 2 witnesses, it was karav law. Now that the erva became mikudeshes, this other woman is a tzaras erva. If that would have been the case, says the Gemara, then we wouldn't even say choyletzes. We would say outright misyabemes. Ve'emekaklum. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? You just told me that whenever there's 2 against 2, the chazaka has no power. The chazaka doesn't resolve anything. So no, the Mishnah by Kedushin can be speaking about 2 against 2. And we cannot say misyabemes. Kaimi edi v'ka'amina kar of law. If 2 witnesses are saying the Kedushin fell close to the erva, which means now the other wife is a tzaras erva, which is not allowed to do yibum. And va'at omarta tisyabem ve'emekach klum. So question on Rabbah, why are you saying that our Mishnah is not speaking about 2 witnesses? Maybe it's also 2 against 2. And weiter, the question is back up. Question number 1, Visu, and furthermore, the Gemara is going to challenge this whole notion that even when there's 2 against 2, the Gemara is now saying, let me tell you that you're not understanding Hazaka correctly. If Hazaka would be a clarification of birur, you're right to say that just like 2 against 100, the 100 doesn't overwhelm the 2. So 2 against 2 and a chazaka, the 2 and the chazaka does not overwhelm the 2. That is if chazaka works like a proof. But chazaka doesn't work with the logic of it's a proof. Chazaka means that since we do not have a proof, leave things the way they are. It's called a status quo. Status quo is not a proof. Status quo is saying that since it's 2 against 2, so we don't know what happened. So since we don't know what happened, the halacha says, whatever the halacha was before, that continues. Before the get was given, what was the din? She was a tzaras erva. So now that we don't know if the get was given, allow her to remain a tzaras erva. In other words, chazaka, that she's muteres l'shuk. Chazaka will work even in a case of trei lagabe trei. So we're back to the contradiction. If that's the case, just like the Mishnah Masechtas Gittin said clearly, Migoreshes ve'eni migoreshes by a suffix, our Mishnah also should hold that if there was a get, suffix cut of loy, suffix cut of law, it should be a suffix gerushin, and therefore the din should be chayletzes v'lo misyabemes. Not the way Rabbah is saying that if there's a suffix get, the Hazaka somehow allows her to be freed even without chalitza. It's not emes. The Hazaka should have a power. And I'll prove it to you, that even when there's 2 against 2, this is the way that we're going to prove it. Now we're going to back it up. We're going to prove that Hazaka is not a birur, that even when there's trei legabe trei, when there's 2 witnesses that are opposing each other, we will look at the Hazaka. Where did we learn that din? Regarding anichsi the bar shatya, regarding the belongings of a man. They called him bar shatya, the master of idiocy. Shatya from the word shtus. Whether that was his name or his nickname is not relevant. But it's important to know the following, that from the few people that halachically, midoiraisa, don't have the power to enact a kinyan, whenever there is a financial transaction, the transaction doesn't only happen because we want it to happen. I want to sell and you want to buy. The wanting doesn't do it. You have to have the desire, and you have to have an act called a kinyan, and the kinyan is what makes the transaction. A person who's a shaita cannot make a kinyan. In halacha, there's a concept that was adopted from halacha and applied in today's world called temporary insanity. What happens if there's a person that sometimes that person is in a state of a shaita, of a halachic shaita, and his or her transactions are worth 0. Other times that person is in a state of sanity. So the halacha would be that, is there a kinyan, a kinyan? It depends when they made it. If they did the kinyan during their temporary insanity moment, then the kinyan is not a kinyan. If they did their act of transaction when the person is saying, then the kinyan is a kinyan. So every time that person is going to sell or buy, you're going to have proof, witnesses to say that that sale happened when he was normal.
There was no way to prove it.
Well, witnesses is a proof. So let's read it. So the Amidat HaNifsi Bar Shatya, the Bar Shatya, this guy called or nicknamed the idiot, the shaita, Zabin Nichse, he sold one of his belongings. And also Beit Treva Amri, 2 witnesses came too. And they said, Kishuhu Chalim Zabin. He sold it when he was Chalim, means when he was healthy, when he was sane. Also Beit Trei, and other 2 witnesses came, V'amru Kishuhu Shaita Zabin. He sold it when he was a shaita. So it's Trei, Legabe Trei. V'amar Ravashi, no, that Oike Trei Lahadi Trei, turning the page to Amid Beis, there is a Hazaka. What's the Hazaka? Who was the properties before the sale happened to Bar Shatya? So it's called Cheskas Mara Kama. We learned this extensively in the Bavis. In other words, the property is muchzak to be in the property of its original owner. So since there's trei legabe trei, you will say that the property remains Bar Shatya's. Obviously, he has to return the money. Good. But the property is his, the sale is not a sale. Here you see
the theory, according to the first understanding that we explained with Rabbah, where 2 against 2 or 2 against Amma.
Makes sense. What
would have happened in that?
Would have happened is you would have had a real doubt. I don't know what would have happened, but there would be no chazaka here. In other words, the chazaka, according to the Havamina, the chazaka is not better than witnesses. So if you have 4 witnesses and I have 2 witnesses, my 2 has the power to equalize not only your 2 and your other 2. So my 2 has the power to equalize your 2 and your chazaka. It would have remained a suffix. Chazaka wouldn't have resolved it. I don't know what the din would have been. We're just proving here that chazaka is taken into account even when there's trei lebahad trei. So there's a stira now clearly between the Mishnah and Gittin and the Rabbah's interpretation of the Mishnah and Yevamos. And that shlugged up Rabbah. And therefore Amar Rabaya tells Rabbah, you're wrong. Just like in our Mishnah, Safik Kedushin, Chayletzes v'lo misyabemes, exactly the same by Gerushin. So now the question only is, why didn't the Mishnah give that example? By Kedushin, the example of Safik Kedushin was Safik Harav Lo, Safik Harav Lo. By Gittin, the Mishnah gave 3 cases where there was a get that was good mid'oraisa, but not good mid'orabanan. So the Gemara says, the wording, Abaya says, Yagid Olav Reyai. One sheds light on the other. Reyai literally means one's friend. One friend speaks for the other. One case clarifies the other. The examples that were given here works for there. The examples that were given there works for here. Tana b'kiddushin, the Mishnah gave an example of a suffix by kiddushin, v'hu hadin b'gerushin. Says Abaye, whenever there's a suffix cut of loy by get, the din will be choyletzes. And let's say Hazaka will work, Danny. She can steer it. And if Hazaka works, then really she should be muteres l'shuk. Gesundheit, the chachamim were machmer. And we're not afraid that this chumrah is going to bring to a kula. How many times did we learn in Masechtas Yevamos that they said choyletzes, where yibum is not allowed? Okay, the chachamim said choyletzes. Not every chalitza will come to a yibum. Okay, that was his chiddush. Okay, let's go back to. Okay, Tana, that's why it's a far-fetched thing. That's why the Gemara before argued that whenever it's b'chlal a far-fetched case, we don't say that extra step. But anyway, let's come back over here. Tana begerushin, the Mishnah gave examples of gerushin where the gerushin was good midoraisa, but not good midorabanan. V'hu hadin l'kedushin. There's only one problem with Abaya that Rava now brings up. So Amalei Rava says Rava to Abaya, Yagid Olivreya. If our Mishnah is the Yagid Olivreya scenario, which he's accepting, there's only one problem. That the Mishnah used the words Zehu. The Mishnah gave an example, and the Mishnah says this is the example. Whenever you use the words this is the example, you are excluding another case. According to Rava, of course we are excluding. The example given by Kedushin doesn't work by Gerushin. But according to you, Abaya, Yagadol Vreyai, everything here works there. Ma zeu diktani. So therefore, it's not that Rava is arguing with Abaya. Rava is clarifying one point. Ella Amar Rava, that kol sheyesh b'kedushin, all of the cases, there's really only one case. By Kedushin, he threw the Kedushin, Suffolk, who was closer. That case does work by Gerushin. Yagid, Olav, Reyai. However, when the Mishnah gave three examples of Gittin, that it's good midoraisa, not good midrabanan, one of those three examples will not work by Kedushin. One of those examples will not be a problem by Kedushin. And it won't be a deoraisa derabanan scenario. However, v'yesh b'gerushin, we'll see the need midrabanan to write the zman, the date in the divorce document. That is a rabbinic demand only by Gittin, according to Rava, not by Kiddushin. That means a Kiddushin document that doesn't have a Zman is kosher, even midrabanan. Masha'inkin b'Kiddushin. The Mishnah said, the Mishnah said the words Zehu, both by Gittin and by Kiddushin. So here we have this concept we always have in the Gemara. The Mishnah wants to be symmetric. Since you said the word here, you say the word there. V'Zehu the Gerushin lav davka. Ela mishum the tani Zehu b'Kiddushin, taminami Zehu b'Gerushin. Now the Gemara wants to clarify which case is the case that is not equal. V'Zehu the Kiddushin lemutemai. So the Gemara says lemut zman, like we just said before by heart, the leka b'Kiddushin. Now, the Gemara wants to know why. Why is Rava suggesting that the rabbinic law that a document of Gerushin needs to have the time in it? And if it doesn't have the time in it, midrabanan, the get is not a kosher get. Why would they not make it also by Kiddushin? So to understand why they wouldn't make it by Kiddushin, we have to now understand why did they make it by Gerushin? Why did they make it by Gerushin? There's a machlokes between a Shlakish and a Yechanan. And the Gemara is going to talk it out. It makes sense. I'll say what that means in a minute. That reason by Gittin is not relevant over here. Let's go back for a second. What is the din when a man and a woman get married? If the woman brings in possessions to the marriage, we're going to call that the nedunya. So the din will be the following. The nedunya that's written in the ksuba is a nedunya that will go back to the woman if he dies before her or if he divorces her. Having said that, there are two types of nedunyas. There are two types of belongings that a woman can bring into her marriage that she will get back if there's a divorce or if he dies before her. One of them is called nichsat saim barzel. It's ironclad belongings. That would mean that if the woman, when she gets married, let's say owns a house, which is evaluated when she gets married $1 million. Nichset Saim Barzel means that the husband is undertaking to give her $1 million if he divorces her or if he dies before her. $1 million regardless if the house would be devaluated into half, regardless if the house would be evaluated into double, the amount of money that she brings in, that money is secured. which then means that the property itself really belongs to the husband. The husband cannot always do anything with it because he needs to own it to have a base, to have a guarantee that he will be able to pay her. But really the property is his. If it becomes double the worth, it's his benefit. Nichse milug, which is what we're talking about, is very common. The word milug comes from the word miliga. Miliga means to pluck. When you pluck a fruit off the tree. Milug means that the woman is getting married, she owns a house. She's telling the husband, this house is mine. While we are married, you have the right, it's called to use fruit. You have the right to keep the money of the rental. The fruits that this house brings is yours, but the house is mine. What does that mean, the house is mine? That when he divorces her, you know what he has to give back to her? The house, as is. If the house is worth triple, she gained triple. If the house became worth a tenth, then she lost. Nichse milug. In other words, nichse milug means that during the marriage, the husband has the right to benefit from her property. That's hers. Why did the Chachamim say you have to write a zman in a divorce document? Says Rish Lakish. Very simple. A man will divorce his wife. Let's say she has nichse milug. Every month he's getting from that rental, he's getting $10,000 rent. And then he divorces her. Now, we are in the month of Mar Cheshvan right now, and he's going to take rental from Mar Cheshvan. She's going to say, no. The rental of Mar Cheshvan belongs to me because you already divorced me. So they're going to have a dispute. Who's getting that month's rent? How will you resolve it? Only by writing the date into the get. So if that's the reason why you need to have that's right.
No good.
Correct, but they wanted it because of a monetary consequence. Says the Gemara, Hazaka, my friends. Do you know from when a man has the right to the user fruit of the nichse milug? Not from the engagement, not from the kedushin. It's only from when the ksuba is written. Kedushin doesn't demand the ksuba. What needs a ksuba is nisuyin. Like we mentioned a day or two ago, some people can write a ksuba beforehand. We actually write a ksuba sometimes a day before. But ksuba is connected to nisuyin, not to kedushin. Because by kedushin, after a man engages his wife halachically, he doesn't b'chlal have any rights to take the user fruit of the nichse milug that she will bring in. So it's not relevant.
No date on the ksuba.
Won't make a difference. On the kedushin, it won't make a difference.
Ksuba needs it.
Yeah, but we're talking about kedushin here. Safi kedushin, or kedushin pasal midrabanan. However, it says the Gemara, that works according to Rish Lakish. This is going to be fantastic logic. Rabbi Yochanan has a whole different reason, and the reason why he gives is because there might be an attempted cover-up. The attempted cover-up is equally needed by kedushin. Is litaken zman? Question mark. What's the attempted cover-up? Now the example, we're trying to give the most realistic example possible. But it's really not only connected to this case. We're giving a case where a man marries his niece. In other words, the man has a love to his wife, independent of her being his wife. It doesn't have to be that way, but for example, so let's say Shimon marries Reuven's daughter. And unfortunately, his wife committed adultery. And they're witnesses. And
His wife, that's his niece.
yeah, and we're speaking at a time of a Beis Din. When there's witnesses, she's going to get killed. Now, he's being forced by Beis Din to divorce her. But she's the niece, he loves her. He doesn't want her to die. So what could he do? He can give her a get. Midayirai said the get was not dated. She goes to the Beis Din and she pulls out her get, and she says, when did the witnesses say? The witnesses says that she committed adultery on such and such a date. A week before I was divorced. Now, you can argue, a man whose wife committed adultery, he's going to conspire with her to save her life? Yeah. The example is the niece, he loves her. He's related to her, he doesn't want her to die. So the Chachamim said, you have to write this man in a document of a get in order for you not to be able to cover up an adultery. Well, the same thing is also by Kedushin. What's the thing of Kedushin? From when is a woman not allowed to commit adultery? When is she illegally married? When is she not allowed to be with any other man under the capital punishment from Kedushin? So the same thing, if there won't be a zman in the Kedushin document, in the rare cases, most times people give a Kedushin with money. But if a man gave Kedushin b'shtar, a document is also needed, asks the Gemara, for us to know that she committed adultery when she was married, or If you'll write a document of Kedushin without a Zman, she's going to say, 1 second, I committed adultery, I wasn't married yet. She'll put out a Shtar Kedushin. So they should demand a Zman anyway. So the Gemara has a great answer. Think about it. The document of Gerushin is going to be used to help her. The document of Kedushin is not being used to help her. What is the document of Kedushin used for in a case of adultery? To hurt her. Even if they would decree to write a Zman, all she needs to do is to say, I lost my document, I don't have it. You don't have a proof from when I was married. In other words, to find her guilty of adultery, having a Zman in the document or not won't help her at all. Because if they're trying to make a conspiracy, she'll say she lost her document. Elama, witnesses will come. If you're having witnesses that are coming, so the Zman won't make a difference. The witnesses remember. Great answer. Let's read it inside. So first, the first answer is, first of all, the reason, even according to Rabbi Yechanan, why didn't the rabbis decree to write a Zman in the Shtar Kedushin, is because most people get engaged, like today, not through a document, through money. And by money, it's not Shaykh a Zman. So if a woman is being held in court because of adultery and she argues, I wasn't married yet, you won't have a document to prove. You'll have to have witnesses. People saw them living as a husband and wife. I was by their wedding. I saw when they got married. Witnesses will remember when. But the Zman and the Shtar won't make a difference. So first answer is, Mishum de Ikeda Mekadosh B'Kasba. Some people marry women with money. V'Ikeda Mekadosh B'Shtara. And therefore, Leitikon Abanan Zman. And before we continue, challenges back the Gemara. 1 second. That's the logic when it comes to a document of emancipation, the purchase of a slave. For her, avda, when a person buys a slave. How do you buy a slave? 2 options. Either through money or through a document. Nevertheless, the rabbis decreed to write a Zman in the Shtar of purchasing a slave. Why don't we say, since anyways, sometimes you buy a slave with money, and when you make a purchase with money, Zman is not Shaykh, so who cares about a document? So the Gemara says, don't compare buying a slave and marrying a wife. Not because they're very different, I know it sounds funny, but because most people bought slaves through a document. Most people always, even when they used to also make engagements through a document, the Iker way of doing Kedushin was always through money. So Ahasam, Ruba, by Avadim, Roiv people do it with a document. So, from when it's a monetary question. From when is it yours? So let's look at the document. Let's look at the time. Hache here by Kedushin, Ruba by Kaspa. And Iba Yisemo, better, like we said before, by heart, Mishum Delay Afsher. If the whole reason, according to Rabbi Yechanan, of the Chachamim's enacting Zman is to prevent a possible cover-up, that is not going to be helpful at all. Writing a time in the document of Kedushin won't resolve it. Heichel Eved, what are you going to do? Lincha Gabadida, is the woman the one holding on to the Shtar Kedushin? Machkalei, she'll erase it. She'll destroy the document. She's not the one by Gittin. She wants to bring the document to prove she was already divorced for the cover-up. Here by Kedushin, the best cover-up is don't bring, I don't have a document. Prove that I was married then. And Lincha Gabadidei, and if you're going to say, well, 1 second, leave the document with him, the whole premise of Rabbi Yechanan is that he wants to help her. Because, for example, it's a relative, it's a niece. So Zimnan the Basachaisehi, Umachapa Allah, he's covering over for her. And if you're going to say that every time a man marries a woman, he has to leave the Kedushin document with independent people by Eidim, so once you have Eidim, you don't need a Zman. The Eidim will testify. Lincha Gabi Eidim. So Amanashach, Id Zechiri. What is the Bach? Id the Kiri. If the witnesses remember, so then they say, listen, let them come and testify. Having a Zman or not won't make a difference. 2 witnesses will come and say, no, they were married before the adultery. And Eloi, and if the witnesses don't remember, the Gemara says something which is good to know. If the witnesses don't remember, for people who are learning the daily portion of Rambam, we learned this a few days ago, Benegea to the law of notarization, of Kiyum Shtaris. So we learned a very important halacha together here, that if 2 witnesses are coming to court to testify that this signature is their signature, they're notarizing their signature, but they bechlal forgot what it says in the document, then that notarization is not valid. 2 witnesses that signed the document, and they forgot the whole act, they forgot what happened, they're not allowed to say, since I see my signature on the document, it must have happened. No. Two witnesses, it has to be mipihem. They testify. V'lo mipi ksavam. So we need to have witnesses that are testifying independent of the document. No, we don't need zman on a kedushin. Zimna dasa michtava. And sometimes they will forget. If they forget, and the only reason why they remember is because they're saying, it says in the document, but they don't remember independently. Now, a document can remind the witnesses, that's okay. But if they mamish don't remember, but they're saying, well, we have the document, then that document is not valid. Says the Gemara, Yachi begerushin nami hachi. Maybe by gerushin, they will also be able, let's say, to erase the zman or to erase the document. So the Gemara says, erasing the document of Gerushin will work against them. Because witnesses say she committed adultery. The only way she'll be freed, even if it's a cover-up, a lie, is by bringing a document that shows that she was divorced before the act. Here, she needs the document. She will not get rid of it. Hasam lahatzala didaka asi. Hachi by Kedushin, the opposite, the document is going to hurt her. So writing in a zman in order to cover up or to prevent a cover-up will not work. If they're trying to cover up, they won't bring the document. So therefore the Chachamim did not decree, not according to Reish Lakish, nor according to Rabbi Yechanan, zman b'kiddushin. So the case that the Mishnah gave, that there was something good midoraisa, kiddushin midoraisa, but the kiddushin was not good midorabanan, cannot go to the case of zman, and that's the meanings of the word zehu. And with this we concluded this daf, and now we're going to continue the next Mishnah. Let's go on Lebedik. The good news is that we learned this case before. For those who are here who didn't hear it before, you'll hear it now for the first time, by heart. Until now, we're learning in the previous Mishnayos a lot about Maimer. Maimer is the pre-Yibum act of Kedushin. We have been learning until now that Maimer is Midrabanan. We learned the Machlekes, remember? Beishamai, Beisilol, is Maimer Mamish Kedushin, or is it at least enough for sure to push away the other, to push away the co-wife? Is Maimer like Beisilol as a Miktsas Kedushin? We're going to have an opinion in our Mishnah, the Tana Rab Shimon, that he has a doubt what Maimer is. Either Maimer is a full-fledged Yibum, like it's marriage, or Maimer is nothing. And because of Rab Shimon's doubt in what Maimer is, there's going to be halachic differences between what Rab Shimon will say in a case of a Maimer and the other Tanoim's opinions in a case of a Maimer. And let's read the case inside. Says the Mishnah. Gimel Achim Nesuim Gimel Nachris. There were three brothers. None of them married sisters. Baruch Hashem. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, each one's wife is not related to any one of the brothers. Which means that if any one of these brothers were to die childless, their widow would fall to Yibum to both brothers, right? Either to one or the other. Mitzvah begadol, but the katan can also do the mitzvah of either Yibum or Chalitz. And that's what happened. So let's go. Umeis echad mehem. Let's say Reuven died. All right. V'asaba hasheni maimer. Shimon didn't do Yibum with the widow of Reuven. Shimon did maimer. And now Shimon dies. So who did Shimon leave? His original wife. And he left Reuven's widow. Now, according to the Tanakama, there's no doubt. Maimer is something, it's like a miktsas kedushin. So let me ask you, this woman, is she Reuven's widow or is she Shimon's widow? As I both. She's Reuven's widow. If Shimon would have done Yibum to her, if Shimon would have married her, then she's no longer Reuven's widow. What is she now? Shimon's wife. If Shimon dies, so it's a man dying, childless, leaving two wives. The din is you have to do Yibum or Chalitza with one of them. But over here, since he only did Maimer, so this wife is as a double widow. So the Tanakama holds that you don't do Yibum there's no Yibum on a double widow. Not only is there no Yibum on the wife that was Reuven's widow, but the original wife of Shimon, who was a co-wife of a double widow, has the same halachic standing of the double widow, which is Chalitza is needed, but not Yibum. Now we're going to have a pasuk. Don't forget that if Maimer is midrabanan, you can't quote a pasuk here. We'll see later it's an asmachta. But what does the pasuk say?
Because either way, right? Even if she's either married, right, or she's not married. So if she's not married,
That will be Rab Shimon's logic. Here it's not either way. The Tanakama holds that Maimer is something, but the something is like a weak marriage. It's called Miktsas Kedushin. That's the problem here. It's something, but not all of it. So if it's only something, so some of her is still Reuven's widow, some of her is Shimon's wife, and now Shimon's widow. Let's read it inside, and it says in the pasuk, Umeis echad mehem, then Yevama Yova Yelel. So we learn from over here, the Bach Beis, that he adds the words, She'alel zikas yovam echad, that who falls to Yibum? A woman who's only a widow of one husband, of one widower, one man. But the She'alel zikas beis yivamim, a double widow doesn't fall to Yibum. I was going to say, if she doesn't fall to Yibum, then don't do Chalitza. We'll see, it's all an asmacht. Okay. However, Rab Shimon Aimer, like we'll talk this out by heart, you know what Rab Shimon says? Rab Shimon says, Maimer is either a full-fledged marriage, or Maimer is nothing. So what do you do now? So we have to come to a ruling that will cover Vimazak all the bases. What will be all the bases? So he says, Miyabim le'ezu sheyirtza. Guys, let's halt up. That Levi could do Yibum, should do Yibum to either one of them, and then he'll have to do Chalitza to the other. So let's go. Can Levi do Yibum to this woman who used to be Reuven's wife? According to Rab Shimon, yes. Why yes? Because either Maimer is a full-fledged marriage, and if that's the case, whose wife is she? Only Shimon's wife, only Shimon's widow. So you can do Yibum with her. Or Maimer is nada, Maimer is nothing. Then whose widow is she? Only Reuven's. So either way, you can do Yibum. What about the other wife of Shimon, the original wife of Shimon? If Maimer was nothing, and therefore she was whose widow's? Only Reuven's. So what is the Shimon's wife? One woman fell from Reuven, one woman fell from Shimon. You have to do Yibum or Chalitza with both. So then Levi would be allowed to do Yibum to both. But maybe Maimer is a full-fledged marriage. If Maimer is a full-fledged marriage, that means that Shimon died with two wives. You can only do Yibum to one of the two wives, not with the other. So the moment he did Yibum with one, he is not allowed to do Yibum with the other. On the other hand, you cannot say she's Muteres L'Shuk, because maybe Maimer is nothing. And if Maimer is nothing, then she is only Shimon's only his wife. So therefore you have to do Chalitza. And the same thing in reverse. If he does Yibum with Shimon's original wife, so what's with the other? If Maimer was a real marriage, then the other wife would be free L'Shuk, because he already married one of Shimon's wives. But if Maimer is nothing, then who is this woman? Only Reuven's widow. She's not Muteres L'Shuk. But since you have a doubt, you have to do Chalitza. So doing Yibum with anyone you want, and doing Chalitza on the other, covers all your bases. So first of all, the Gemara clarifies the opinion of the Tanakama, that Ve'i zikas beis yevamim de'oraisa, by him quoting a pasuk, Umeis echad mehem, that a woman who's a single widow is false to Yibum, but not a double widow, then Chalitza should also not need it. So the Gemara says right away that this din of the Tanakama is only a rabbinic law. It's only midrabanan. And as we keep on learning, whenever the Rabbanan enact a rule, they can only be machmer, they can't be mekel. So therefore they say, do chalitza, but you can't do yibum. No, they don't want marriage to happen, but they can't totally free her. Frag the Gemara 1 second, and Vigzeda, why did they make this enactment? Right, that chalitza should be needed? Because Shema Yoimru, when people will look at this case, they will not know that Shimon did maimer to her. What do they know? Reuven was married and he died. Shimon was married to another woman and he died. There are two different widows. As far as people know, each widow came from a different bias. And what is the din? If each widow comes from another man, each one needs something. And if the Chachamim will allow them to go free without anything, people might say that Beis Yevamos Habois mi Bayis Echad. I'm sorry, if he's going to marry both of them, what will people think? People know that Shimon did maimer to her. So they're going to think that Shimon died with two wives. Levi's going to marry both of them. People are going to think that you can marry both widows and you're not allowed to. I at least do Yibum with one and do Chalitza with the other. So the Gemara says, Shema Yoimru, people are going to say that Bayis Echad Miktsasei Banoi U Miktsasei Chalutz. That if two widows fall from one man, You have to do yibum with one, and you still need to do chalitza with the other, and that's not true. If two widows fall from one brother, from one husband, whatever you do to one frees the other. Let people say that what bad will happen. So big deal. People will make that mistake. Nothing wrong happened. No takala is going to happen. So says the Gemara, no. If a person first does yibum and then does chalitza, then nothing bad will happen. But Zera, what might happen? That Levi might do chalitza first, and then and then he's going to do yibum in the second. And what will people think? That Shimon had two wives. And what did Levi do? They'll see with the kosher stempel of the rabbis, he did chalitza with one of the wives. Now remember, we learned together, once chalitza was done, this is a negative commandment from the words that kiven shalei bana shuv la yivna. Once chalitza is done to the widow, she's no longer allowed to be taken into marriage, not her, nor her co-wife. It was a machlekes, Rabbi Yechanan and Ish Lakish, if it's an ever deoraisa or is it not a deoraisa, but you're not allowed to do that. Over here, if we'll do chalitza and then yibum, people are going to think that after chalitza you have to do yibum with the other wife, and you could, and that's a violation. And so therefore the rabbi said, according to the Tanakama, do chalitza with both, and you can't do yibum with either of them. We'll stop over here, and God willing to be continued next year.